When I was 14 years old, I was just about to go into the ninth grade, and it was August, um, and I was training for football. So I was running a couple hours, a couple miles a day, really working out hard, probably in the best shape of my life. Um, I went through that summer and I worked really hard. And I remember we went on a shopping trip one day and bought a couple of things, did a lot of walking. That night I had leg aches. By the next day, the leg aches got worse and I started to get weak. Within a couple of days, I was so weak that I couldn't stand on my tiptoes. I couldn't tune my guitar. I could hardly turn a doorknob. And so they began to wonder what was wrong. The first thing they did was send me to the chiropractor, and he couldn't determine anything. They sent me to the medical doctor in my hometown. My hometown is very small, 2,000 people. But I went to the medical doctor, and we came away from that, and he was clueless as to what was going on. In fact, he asked my mom if she thought there was a possibility I could be on drugs because the reaction was so weird. Well, that didn't go over well. So they didn't know what was going on. This was late in the week, and Saturday morning, I'll never forget it, I was laying in bed, and my dad would always wake me up early on Saturday morning, usually by grabbing my big toe and saying, "Come on, it's time to get to work." I remember hearing him come on Saturday, and he walked in the room and he said, "Why don't you sleep in today?" And it completely freaked me out. And the first thought through my mind was, I'm dying. There's something's wrong, because he would never say that to me. And I completely freaked out. And I'm like, oh, okay, what's going on? Later that day, we got in the car and we drove to Rochester, Minnesota, which was about 3 hours from where I grew up. And they took me to the Mayo Clinic. Then I really knew something was wrong, because when you go to the Mayo Clinic, you know, that's where people go to for mysterious diseases. They put me in the Mayo Clinic or in St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, and they started doing tests on me. And it came back that I had Guillan Barre syndrome. Never heard of it, of course. I thought the other name, which they used a little bit more at that time, was very interesting. It was called post-infectious polyradiculitis. And that's what the doctors called it. And I thought that was kind of a cool name, but I was still freaked out because I continued to get weaker and weaker. And this all happened in a matter of just a couple of days. So I'm in this hospital. My roommate was from France. He was there for open heart surgery. We were on the peds floor. So he's about my age, about 14. And open heart surgery, couldn't talk any English. And so I knew I was in the big leagues. I knew something was really wrong. So what they ended up doing was they would traipse the medical students in. I'd have to walk around in my little gown in front of them, try to walk the line. They did things like they'd have me hook my finger, and then they'd hook it and they'd say, "Okay, now resist." And so I'd hold it as hard as I could, and it would just do this. And he says, "No, you're not resisting." I said, "No, I'm doing everything I can." I was so weak, they couldn't even do that. I couldn't button my shirt. I couldn't do anything. When I walked, it was like I had flippers on. My feet would just flop. So they did me a series of tests, some of them quite painful. And then they determined that this was it. And for me, the cure was strictly physical therapy. And so after approximately a week in the hospital, they sent me home with all these exercises to do. And then I did that. And then I slowly got a little stronger. And again, this was in early August. And I would say by the time November came around, I was probably 80%. And then I got stronger from there, and then got back to my normal time. So some of the tests we did while I was in St. Mary's Hospital, first of all, they did a couple of spinal taps, which is fun. So I had to be really careful not to, obviously not to move while they're doing it, but then not to get up because of the bad headaches and so on. So they did that, and then they did a lot of probing, and they did this while I was there, and then on follow-ups, I would go in, and I remember specifically one of the areas they did was right here. They would stick needles in here, hooked up to electrodes, and then I would have to flex my hand, and then it would register something about the muscles in there. These were like horse needles too. It hurt. It hurt like crazy. And then especially when you start moving the muscles around. And then they did a lot of things where they just had me walk. They watched me walk and watch my balance and things like that. Those are the main things I remember about the testing that they did. So when they sent me home, they put me on a physical fitness routine, um, just physical things to try to build my muscles back. I don't remember any kind of medication whatsoever. What they had me do in PE is I did a lot of swimming just for overall fitness. And again, I went from the best shape of my life in less than a week to being just unbelievably weak. So they put me on this. Obviously, I couldn't play football that year. They put me in the rotation. I was constantly in the swimming rotation in PE. So I was doing a lot of that type of work to get stronger. And anything I could do to try to build up. It's not like I could do push-ups. I couldn't do one push-up. So I had to do simple things. Walking, swimming was fantastic for it. So I did a lot of that type of thing, anything to try to build it back up. As I was beginning my recovery period, I began to study and try to find out more about what was going on with this whole thing. And I actually found out that not too far from me, there was a young lady that had the same disease. And then I began to feel very lucky because they actually put her in an iron lung because her lung shut down. She couldn't even breathe on her own. So then I began to feel quite lucky, but I also began to worry a little bit about what was going on in the future. They did tell me, and to this day, tell me I have a better chance of this coming back than the average person. I can't get a flu shot to this day because if you read the fine print in flu shots, Guillan Barre is the one disease listed that if you've had it, flu shots are out. So I didn't even realize that until just a couple of years ago. So emotionally, this has had a big effect on my life. I think part of it was going, once again, from being in excellent physical condition to just being wiped out completely. Something in my head said, you got to be careful how hard you work in the future physically because it may trigger it again. Now, that probably has nothing to do with it, but in my head, it kind of does. Later on in life, I trained for a marathon, and one of the biggest parts of training for the marathon and running it was fighting that voice in my head every day that said, you are setting yourself up to get sick again. It didn't happen, thank goodness, but I constantly thought about that. I constantly think about that. And now, of course, it's been years and years ago, but there's the emotional thing that hangs on through this, and I'm sure through any kind of sickness, is that the door is cracked for it to come back, and I've got to do everything I can to make sure it doesn't.